Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to today's meeting about the committee government structure of the Allen Fire Reform Commission. I'm going to call this meeting to order and begin roll call. Commissioner Climate.
President.
Commissioner Matt.
President.
And Chair Bevelin. I would like to notify the public that our cancellation staff are identified corner. May you please introduce yourself? Thank you.
Hi, I'm here, I'm one of the interpreters, if anyone believes Spanish interpretation.
Thank you. We're going to begin with public comment.
Neighborhood council?
That's what you think.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm gonna do that.
Okay.
Yeah, we're beginning with public comment. I'm going to lead to our Minister of Public Comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have so far 2 people signed up for public comment. Let's start with those 2 first. I have Bruce and then Rob. Please come up. Perfect, that's a great place. We have 1 item on the agenda, so 2 minutes max, so 1 or 2 minutes. 2. Just this clock today. That clock. Okay, I'm just gonna time it on my clock. 1 second. Okay, go.
Yes, I'm Bruce Dixon, Lowe's volunteer, we can talk vote. I'm delighted that personal voting seems top of mind for the commission. Proportional voting goes by the initials PR. Sam Davidson, PhD, a fellow of equal vote volunteer, gave me some points to share. Within all the ballots and how they are counted, which PR method is more democratic? Ranked choice or star. For the same reasons we believe single winner star voting is more democratic, we believe star PR is better. Why? 1. Slides submitted with my written comment show star PR voting eliminates the spoiler effect several times as much as ranked choice PR. 2. Ranked choice PR generates roughly 10 times the number of voided ballots. Errors include unequal ranking and skipping the rank. Ranking errors don't exist in scoring vote methods. 3. In star PR, ballots allow voters to weigh in on every candidate on the ballot without the added labor of calculating relative to value. This is why Amazon product ratings are not ranked, just scored. Clearly, PR voting can be used for single seat elections, the mayor, city controller, or city attorney. In an academic simulation on YouTube, only star approval and rank robin voting methods achieve the crucial goal of reducing spoiler effects to their lowest level.
And thank you, 2 minutes time. Alrighty, Rob. 2 minutes and go, sir. Yeah.
May start next time.
Sure.
First, I wanted to thank the controller's office, all our elected officials, one of the most engaged on the process, not just here with this commission, but years going back. This whole issue with the CFO is a fascinating one, just because it was initially kind of plopped into a report and the committee said, let's go forward, and then controller pushed back and everybody does, maybe we need to think about this a whole lot more. And that is why we are here. I don't know where I fall on that issue. Partial to maybe going to the controller, and there are good arguments maybe why it shouldn't. But I don't think the CAO is necessarily the natural choice. No knock on that office, but I think we forced them to wear way too many hats. And we should be conscientious of that. That also just does bring something forward as you actually do make decisions, that's when people get engaged. That's when it gets tough. And that's why we need to start making decisions deliberately. It exposes this tension, it brings issues forward. I am happy to hear we will get some reports at some point. But I do think it's worth noting that these reports we've gotten so far usually come a day or two in advance. And we've seen with the ad hoc committee, how when you do that, it hinders their ability to make informed decisions. We need to have these things 5 days in advance at least, so that the public can respond, and so you actually have time to read them. That is really, really important. Lastly, I will just note as far as the neutrality of those reports, it's unrealistic to say that it's a neutral document. In the documents we've seen so far, there have been decisions about who to include, what to include from their recommendations, and there will be judgment calls that may be made. We should be honest about that. And the only way we can avoid missteps there is if being engaged here and deliberating, exposing those issues and figuring out how we can direct the staff appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone additionally who didn't get a chance to sign up who would like to speak for public comment? Going once and twice, all right, concludes public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. If there are any neighborhood councils here that have approved community impact statements, feel free to identify yourselves. Seeing none, we will move on to item 1 of our agenda, that is a study session. We will have presentations from city controller, office of CAO. I'll leave it to staff to administer those presentations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item number 1, study session government structure, comment and discussion on issues related to executive orders, including reviewing city charter provisions relating to the current distribution of legislative, executive, and administrative powers among elected offices, and exploring reforms, including the roles of CEO and CFO. Our first presentation is from our citywide elected city controller, Kenneth Leal. Honorable Mr. Leal, please come up and join. We're gonna get your presentation up here in just a second. I think that where the mic is might be the best place to sit it for you. For the PowerPoint? Who's gonna? Oh, she's gonna, we're getting it on screen. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. Where are you sending it?
It's very tough.
Where are you sending it? You got it, yeah. Gotta make sure. It's a little bit, no?
Because it's
Publishing instructions. Almost there. Maybe it's another HDMI. Sorry. Or something. If you, yeah, absolutely. We'll take another set of eyes.
What is it? This one.
Oh, that could be it. Let's try another one. We're gonna try another connection.
Thank you for bearing with us as staff works through the technical.
Okay. So, down. You? Let's see how it works. Hopefully. Which is this one, which is, I think it's this one. It's still not working.
That's what we had.
It is open. Something. Darn it. Okay, well, we're gonna give this one more try and then we'll just move on. This isn't working. Okay, yeah,
Someone, I can connect to the wire.
sure, if you want to try it.
There, control. You mean this is a 30? Samsung?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. We try to do. This one.
I mean, didn't they plug it in this way last time?
We can try that one.
Yeah.
Did both of them. It's not the,
Always not paid for copies. We'll just have.
I don't think it's the right. Yeah, it goes to, and we did this one too.
Um.
Well, now it's disconnected fully.
Let me try a different one.
Cisco.
Okay. We tried. Hold on. Sorry about that.
Unfortunately, it looks like we will not be able to do a stream presentation, but it is okay. All of our commissioners have paper copies of this presentation for our public. Presentations are posted online on the commission website, the materials.
City of LA gas. You are connected, okay. And so, just need to cast it.
Yeah, I think we should just,
Yeah, let's
we tried.
call it. You can still share it to the Zoom on the internet and for folks in the room, feel free to put up mobile devices.
I think I got it. I can do it.
Hold on, you might have gotten it.
Hold on. See if I could do it. Okay. Smart view. See you. Right. Actually. Allow, was it allow?
There you go. That's why I'm the chief technology officer. We make things efficient and effective, yeah, right?
Thank you.
All right. Reason number 1,003,1. So good. Okay, so I could just show my PowerPoint slideshow. Can everyone see? Everyone's good? All right, well, thank you to the committee on government structure. Appreciate you all for having me. Today we're gonna talk about the government structure as it surrounds the city controller's office. And our abilities to carry out work, and also our views and thoughts on the chief financial officer position, which we've been pushing. And before I speak, I just want to preface it that, we'll be talking about the way the current structure is and how the city operates. And how it handles its finances, and so some parts it may, I mean, with all the utmost respect to my colleagues, and so. But when we talk about these issues, we talk about them in an honest manner. So the history of the city controller. This started off actually as the LA city auditor in 1878, and it's been in an elected position since 1889. And they changed it to the city controller in 1925 due to the charter reform, and then about 25 years ago, they added a scope of us to do performance audits. So we've basically been the city's independent watchdog over your tax dollars for close to 150 years. And so this is the way our office looks like in terms of the current government structure. So in the middle, you can see we're here, and you can see all the different types of work we carry out. We carry out our audit services, we carry out financial analysis and reporting, we do accounting operations, and then we have our general administration support. But if you look on the very left, these are the areas that my office doesn't control because of the way the current structure is. So when it comes to my budget, it is, set by the mayor, city council, advised by CAO as well. When it comes to my authority on how I carry out my job and how we interpret the charter and how it's defended, that's by the city attorney. When it comes to us trying to hire staff or anything related to personnel, that's also touched on by personnel and also the CAO's office as well. So these are areas that we are heavily dependent on in order to do the work over here. So if anything is affected over here by these other offices or departments, that can have a material effect on us and how we carry out our job. And so just some basics about our current staffing. So everyone thinks that the controller does all these audits, like we are the auditor that gets the most attention. But as you can see from the makeup, due to, that slide before that I showed you, due to all the staffing changes and the budget adjustments, my audit division is actually the lowest group in terms of staffing, in terms of my office. Actually, a lot of my work relates to accounting operations, which deals with paying employees, managing vendors, and also doing general financial analysis or reporting, whether that's doing the city's financial reports, doing our funds and appropriations, and also general accounting. So that is the bulk of my work. Nearly 3/4 of my work is making the city's lights stay on. And so we made 6 recommendations so that way it can impact that structure, because the way the current structure is, it can really affect our office, negatively, depending on how people feel in a certain year when the budget happens. And so the 6 things provided for our budget independence. Our office to be the chief financial officer, have minimum qualifications for the controller or the CFO. clarify the controller's performance audit authority to include all city programs. Allow the controller to hire outside counsel, and then also enshrine the fraud, waste, and abuse division in the charter. So those are our 6 recommendations. And so the reason why we are fighting for budget independence is because we are an independent elected oversight body. And our budget can feel the winds of any budget cuts. If there's any politics involved, that can really affect the way we carry out our role, as you saw in the very beginning slide. Just recently, voters actually approved a charter of an ER, which created an annual budget for another oversight department here in the city, which was the Ethics Commission. And it was voted overwhelmingly from 75% to 25%. In addition, having our office have an independent budget would bring us in line with other cities that have departments that are also in oversight roles, such as in New York City, San Francisco, and Chicago. And so these are just examples of how you could see how the controller's office has faced multiple years of budget cuts. So over 15 years ago, we were nearly at 200 employees, and now we're all the way down to 140-ish. And if I go to the next slide, I think it froze. Whatever. I know how to fix this. You just have to disconnect and reconnect all the time. Yeah. And then I go back in. And do it again. And it should show. Sorry. Okay, hold on. Okay, so we're back. And as you can see, because of just our office getting cut and cut and cut and cut, last year we actually lost 27 positions. There has been a detrimental effect to the city controller's office to just carry out our basic charter mandated responsibilities. The charter says that the city controller should set up a cycle to regularly audit all 40+ departments, including the proprietaries. We're not allowed to do that because we only have, 7 performance auditors for the entire city, over $35 billion. We received hundreds of claims of fraud, waste, and abuse. Last year, we received over 700, and I only have 5 fraud, waste, and abuse investigators. So I can't effectively investigate fraud, waste, and abuse. I cannot also proactively launch, risk-based investigations because we're always reacting when it is a place where we are proactive with fraud, waste, and abuse. Because of our staff, because we've had to eliminate the city's annual preliminary financial report, which is included in the city's financial policies as a gauge on where the city is at financially in the middle of the year. We also had experienced delays in closing our books, the accounting books, and that in turn has affected departments using their budgets because you can't use your new budget unless you close the books from the year before. We've also had delays in effectuating council instructions. So basically, if every meeting council votes for the controller to move funds to different departments and accounts, and because staffing because of that area, we're late on issuing those transfers. We're also experiencing delays in making payments to vendors and employees, and we can't even provide effective oversight over these payments that we do, and so that's one area. We've also experienced many lawsuits and grievances because of these issues of not being able to hold in payroll or pay fast enough. We've also incurred many penalties because we also do tax reporting as well, because we've been late on that. And then we've also just been unable to train all the citywide finance and accounting professionals because we lack the staff in order to do that. And basically when the departments mess up on their accounting or financial transactions, it comes back to us anyways to fix it, and we just have this whole cycle of inefficiency. So you can just see how, because of that structure, how we don't control our budget, we don't control how people read the charter or our authority, because we don't control our hiring, any delays or if there are any cuts, we feel to do to carry out our mandate mission.
Looks like it froze again. It was. 'Cause now it gets to the CFO part, so. Yeah. Wow. It freezes every like 10 minutes, so I guess you have to like, okay, we're back. Okay. Here's the part everyone wants. Why does Los Angeles need a CFO? Right now, there is no one steering the ship on how the city handles its finances, nor planning for the city's long-term fiscal health. If we were, if there is, then the current status quo is not good. We have dishonest budgeting, we have constant overspending with no accountability. We set unrealistic, overly optimistic revenue projections that we don't reach. Our current financial solutions are short-term and short-sighted, which have had a detrimental impact for Angelinos. And I'll just give you some solutions in which the city has been tackling the financial crisis. We've been relying on austerity measures like budget cuts. So we've been taking cuts from other departments, keeping their funds to fund overspending, and other departments. We've been implementing hiring freezes, we've been implementing furloughs, layoffs, and also drawing down on our reserves. And we've also had the city's bond ratings downgraded. And just recently, the city has had to declare a fiscal emergency. And so my point is, if there is someone steering the ship, then the current status quo is not it, and that's why we need a CFO. And can I show you next slide? Why does it keep doing this? Now I have the fun charts. Yeah, I think it's coming back. Okay, here we go. So here's just an example of one of the areas of dishonest budgeting. So the city has been paying hundreds of millions of dollars in liability payouts. But as you can see, over the past 3 fiscal years, the city has only been budgeting $87 million. When the city overspends, the city has to take that money from somewhere else, and that is what we saw through austerity measures, holding bonds, drawing from the reserve fund, taking from the unappropriated balance, things like that. So you just see how, if we know we're spending so much on liabilities, how come we're only budgeting a small amount? All right, this is good, but it's not working. But I'll just say the next thing too, that if you go to the next page. The other example that we give is our revenue projections. And so pretty much what we said is the city is giving too many overly optimistic, unrealistic revenue projections to the point where the city has had a nearly $400 million shortfall in the city's general fund over the past 2 fiscal years. And what I'm showing you here is my office releases a revenue forecast right here. And then also the mayor, city council, and CAO, they also have their adopted budget. And you can see the actual numbers, and you can just see how far off they were compared to actual revenues received. And you can see how ours is actually closer. In addition, you can see how the reserve fund has dropped dramatically at record reserves at the start of 2 years ago, and now we're below 5%. 5% is the threshold that you want the city's reserve funds to be at. to cover emergencies. So another reason why we need a CFO is we need someone who's independent and who's also qualified to give financial advice. We need someone who is also not just responsible to the mayor and to the city council, but to the people of Los Angeles, because these are your tax dollars. In addition, many of the responsibilities are spread across many different offices and departments. As you can see here, here's a list of some of the, the 3 offices that work on finances. You have our office, you have Office of Finance, you have the CAO. And you can sort of see how a lot of the work we do, under a traditional CFO, accounting, financial analysis, some controls, forecasting, audits, things like that. This is our bread and butter. And so, if you were to change it to us being the CFO, it actually wouldn't change anything in the division of labor. Finance would still be the tax collector, the treasurer, the CAO would still be doing the budget, debt, risk management, things like that. But what would be different is we need to solidify and engrave that there's someone who's gonna steer us for a long-term strategic financial vision and be responsible to the people and not just to the mayor and to the city council. And so we said, why does the city need a CFO? Now I'm gonna talk about why the controller should be the CFO. We need someone who can oversee, like I said, the city's financial health and provide long-term strategic vision. Our office actually is filled with financial professionals, and we have multiple CPAs in our office. We can give independent, honest feedback, and we can be accountable to the voters and to the taxpayers, not just to other elected officials. And it's actually common for the controller to be CFO, just as we've seen in New York City, Houston, and in San Francisco. And like I said before, we are doing the job of CFO, as many of what you find in the traditional CFO fall under what we're doing already. And here's our long-term vision, which many of us in the cities actually already started to implement because we've been pounding the horn and just sounding the alarm on this. But we've been advocating for a CFO, and look, we're discussing it. We've been advocating for a 2-year budget, and now we're discussing it. We've been advocating for a 5-year capital infrastructure plan, and now the mayor has an executive director doing that. We want more honest and transparent budgeting. We need better accountability over overspending, and we need performance-based budgeting as well to see where our tax dollars are going. And we also need to empower our departments with their budgets, because if you can empower the departments with their budgets, you can see how they can actually serve the city much more effectively, rather than having, an analyst tell you how to handle your operations. So this is why we need minimum qualifications for a CFO. There should be a background, whether in finance or accounting. The charter actually has similarities for the city attorney, where they have to be a member of the bar. That should apply as well. And I'll just tell you why. As the city's first CPA, we've been forecasting revenues more accurately compared to the city right now. We've been sounding the alarm about overspending. We've been encouraging city leaders to budget more honestly, and actually, this fiscal year, the city actually budgeted way more accurately with liability payouts than the past, fiscal years. We've been advocating for the CFO in the 2-year budget since we've been in office, and that's happening. We've been advocating for cost-saving measures such as saving for borrowed costs, and also sounding the alarm on overpaying on pensions contributions. We've been meeting monthly with departments to go over their financial and performance metrics so that we can incorporate performance-based budgeting, which we're going to release later this year. And also, we've created an array of financial transparency websites and tools to keep the city informed on the city's finances and health. And I'll just touch briefly on the rest. But our other 3 recommendations are pretty much we need to clarify our audit authority. I don't know if you all saw, but the chair of the Charter Reform Commission 20 years ago, Erwin Chemerinsky, actually clarified that our audit authority performance audits included auditing all city programs under elected officials, and that's some of the areas that we've been facing a lot of pushback on here in the city. So we want that clarified. In addition, as I said before, if the city attorney disagrees with the way we read the charter, or if the charter commission 20 years ago, if they disagree with that, they won't defend our charter authority. That's why we're asking for a limited circumstances to have outside counsel. Similar to how actually the voters voted for that in our last election for the ethics commission, where the ethics commission, if there is a conflict with an elected official, we could have our own outside counsel. And then lastly, we want to ensure our fraud, waste, and abuse unit, because right now it's just an ordinance, and you know, it can be done away anytime by elected officials if you don't want any more investigations into the fraud, waste, and abuse. And so, I know that was staggered, but yeah, those questions.
Thank you. We'll give them about 10 minutes to answer questions, more of these.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for your presentation. It was extremely thorough, so we appreciate you being here. So as you mentioned, you're an independently elected official, accountable directly to the people. Yet your office is facing budget cuts, your revenue projections aren't always followed, and your audits are sometimes dismissed. If the CFO role were to be housed under the controller, what concrete protections would ensure that the CFO's recommendations can simply be overridden by the mayor, city council, or department leadership? So in other words, how can we prevent the same pattern of sidelining from undermining the CFOs before you in your perspective?
Right, well, I think specifically when it comes to the CFO role, it would be similar to the city attorney, where the city attorney gives quick advice. Same thing with your accountant, you know, your personal life, you have an accountant, it's up to you if you wanna take the advice of your accountant or your CFO at the end of the day to make financial decisions, and so. I don't think, we would have, that's why I said there wouldn't be any difference in power. The mayor and city council would still be the ones making the ultimate decision, but I think what we need is someone to enshrine, that CFO role to give that honest opinion on something that might be a bad financial idea. For example, the convention center, we didn't really have anyone giving honest financial feedback and saying this is a bad, from a financial standpoint, idea. Because of how it's structured now, people report to the mayor and city council, depending on what they want. They have to give their presentations based, you know, on how that is, and because I'm independent, I can give that unabashed feedback. But in terms of, you know, they can still ignore, like that's how it's even, I got more money for auditors, or they enshrine my performance audit powers for city programs. Under electeds, I can still do the audit, but they can just dismiss my recommendations as well. So I think, you know, it's just, these recommendations are just putting the city at having a better foothold on the city's finances, and also giving us the power to be more effective than we already are.
I have a question. It seems from your presentation, like the budget from staffing cuts that have affected your office in the name of a balanced budget to remedy the other shortfalls across the city. They actually do the opposite, and it costs the city more in the long run. Do you think that that's true, and is that part of why you think independent budget is necessary?
Oh, yeah, from a financial standpoint, when we don't have enough accountants or auditors or investigators, anything that happens, whether it's us getting sued, whether it's the city going outside of our office and hiring an outside firm to do audits or to do investigations, or we can do it in-house at much cheaper rates, because, you know, you're already paying for it. It does tend to cost more, and so we see that when the city, basically pays more when we get sued because it relates to payroll or payments, or the fact that when we need to provide oversight, they ignore us and they just hire a more expensive, you know, firm to take care of that.
It also brings light, it looks like your budget, the controller looked better on pulse than the one I got from the mayor's office and CAO. You implied that it was because you have a CPA, but do you think there are other reasons about why your projection were closer to the average?
For why our revenue projections are,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think it comes to show that our office, like you have to be a finance professional. In other offices, in no disrespect to the CAO, but to be an analyst, you don't really need to have a financial background. The people who do the revenue forecast are led by CPAs. And so it just goes to show that when you actually have people who are competent, who know how to do ratios, do reports, and be able to have an independent, voice to give out more honest numbers, you get better results, and that's what we've been trying to warn, whether it's on overspending or whether it's on the revenue forecast.
My last question, along with identifying the controller as CFO, are there other powers beyond those in your recommended list that you think need to be enumerated, so it's just not a title and name only, but, it's key to it?
I mean, we respect the mayor and the council having like a lot of the executive decisions, and so, we just really want to be able to be that effective, independent watchdog over the city's finances. And so I think what we've recommended will enable us to do that. Like I said, and I want to iterate, we're not taking away any responsibilities for anyone else. We're just enshrining that, okay, there is someone here who actually can have a vision for the city's finances instead of dealing with the status quo solution that we saw.
It's helpful, thank you, Commissioner Pratt.
Yes, thank you again for coming and navigating those problems, but I have two questions for you. I think first off, you touched on just right now in your presentation that adding the controller as CFO would alter the division of labor amongst interactions with your office, but also CAO and the Office of Finance. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more and curious on your thoughts on like whether I guess potential specific functions or like authorities would need to either move or shift around so that we or the city can make a more effective scan for laws.
Right, so I think physically, there needs to be, changes where, and it relies on council too, but I think that there should be monthly updates by the CFO on how the city's doing financially. My office is actually doing that monthly. We've been meeting with elected officials privately to discuss the city's finances, because usually when we get the first financial status report from the CAO, it's already December or November, and we're already like midway through a budget deficit and we're broke. And so I would like that to be something where the CFO can actually, that can be enshrined somewhere to have the CFO give those monthly updates on the city's revenue and expenses. I'm already doing that, already meeting with departments every month. Not only go over their finances, but we're also going over their performance metrics, because yes, you spent X amount, but what did I get out of that? And that's why one of our long-term visions is to build this performance-based budgeting model, which is what we've seen in private companies, and that's what I've taken from my expertise as a CPA in the private sector to include that. So not only talk about finance is good, but also performance is good too, because you want to make sure that those dollars that are being used effectively.
And my second question is, I think from your perspective, in financial oversight, I was wondering if you have any suggestions for our commission. One of the topics that we are going to go over in this committee, but for the commission is that is going to expand the council by how much, and I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that and what are the reforms will be needed to accompany it. I think, for example, how might a larger council affect the way that your office is able and their ability to provide financial.
Sure, so my opinion on council expansion is, I support it. And I think what you will see when we compare to other cities that have expanded council size is that their staffing is not as large as ours, because they've been able to, diversify their budget in a way that a council member doesn't need to have 50 staff. Right now, there are some offices who have over 40 staffers because they handle 250,000, 300,000 constituents. And so I think you all have a very critical role right now, because you could change that. And if you could find a way as the Charter Commission to make government more efficient and effective, Whether that's also having a COO, whether it's having a CFO, cutting the bureaucracy when it comes to hiring, the bureaucracy when it comes to how we handle our finances. If you guys can find a way to do that, then we can expand in the city of LA to have a much larger council. And not have these council offices that literally have 40 people, because your departments would be working better, because the red tape is not there. So that's why you don't need 40 people to shepherd each transaction, because government is just so inefficient. So I think there are ways to save costs, and that has to deal with, fixing the charter and cutting this bureaucratic red tape that we see. And once you do that, we'll be able to govern more effectively and have a larger council.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Bray. Okay, thank you.
So last night at our meeting, some commissioners raised some concerns about how a 2-year budget cycle would interact with mayoral terms. Can you speak a little to that, if there is any interaction and what it could potentially?
Well, right now, when we actually got into office, we were in the middle of the budget process. So, it happens right now. I think if you were to have a multi-year budget, at least you would come in halfway. Or even, you might even have more time, because when we became into office, it was in December, and so that's already the middle of the fiscal year. But depending on where it's at in the budget, we'll either be in the very beginning or we'll be at towards the end of it. So I think it might actually, work better in that aspect, because if it's a 2-year budget and you come in the beginning of it, then you can change it. That's why we advocate for these 2-year budgeting. And it's fun, the reason why we want a 2-year budget is because for some of the reasons that I mentioned, the city, we just have a dishonest budget. We budget over $1 billion in homelessness, and then we only end up really spending $500 million. And then our excuse that is, well, that money was actually to be spent over multiple years. And then the reason, then the question I have is that why did you include it in your annual budget if you're not gonna spend it all? And so if we came in at the beginning of that fiscal year as a newly elected, we could come in and adjust that budget if we need to. And so, I think and if it's at the end, then just finish that one and then we go into the next 2 years. So I think the timing doesn't really have a huge difference.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Controller. We appreciate your time, and we really appreciate you also serving us as controller of this day as, tech whiz to get that up and running. But we are excited, to work on these proposals and consider them in the future.
Thank you.
So much. All right, your next presenter, Mr. Chair, is our CAO. I don't know if we'll be able to get the presentation, but we have printed out. Do you want to try it?
Try.
She's trying, okay, fantastic. Give us a second, so. Mirror what all controller did. And perhaps if the controller wants to take ITA under his umbrella, that might help.
I guess can I do wireless?
Meeting in there so you can get questions.
No, either place, wherever you want to be, that's fine, yeah, because we'll just have this on you for the presentation. What you need.
Okay. Alright.
We'll give this another minute or two, but if not, we have hard copies.
We have extra hard copies for the public as well. Staple them.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go.
Go for it, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, commissioners. Matt Sabo, City Administrative Officer. Today I'm gonna walk you through a presentation on what the CAO's office does. And this is, to be clear, this is essentially a one-on-one on what the powers and duties, responsibilities currently in the CAO's office. I will at a later date have recommendations, so I'm not what I'm walking through are not recommendations. This is as it stands today. So we'll go to the next slide. We'll start with the overview. So the CAO's office was established in 1951. The purpose was to create greater efficiency in city government by centralizing budgetary and fiscal controls. So the CAO is the principal financial officer, the principal financial advisor to the mayor and the city council. It is also a central office for administrative analysis and management. And it is the only appointed city officer to report both to the mayor and council, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But when the office was established, it was there was significant debate about what the city needed at the time. The principal objective was to create greater efficiency. It was not intended to be a city manager. So the CAO does not directly manage city departments. The general managers of each city department manage city departments under the direction of the mayor and with the oversight of the city council. But the CAO's office does have many of the administrative oversight functions that you might find in a city manager's office. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you can probably come up a little bit.
Seems to be going in and out of the
Great, thank you.
Okay, there we go. We have we have a unique classification in the CAO's office of an employee that requires a unique training and skill set in order to work in the CAO's office. That classification is administrative analyst. And just to give you a flavor, the job responsibilities of administrative analysts, they're responsible for work including analysis and recommendations in the field of budget planning and monitoring, budget investigation, preparation, capital programming, contracts, personnel utilization, control, grants, economic development projects. I would also add municipal facilities projects is also under our office, system and technology project, proprietary department programs, and special studies. As it relates to the CAO's position as the office that reports both to the mayor and the council, this is a critical distinction. There actually was in the history of in the last century, in 1976, there was a move to consider essentially elevating and duplicating the roles that the CAO had at the time and give them to the CLA so that you would have an office with essentially all the powers and duties of the CAO in the CLA's office that would report exclusively to the council, where the CAO would do the same type of work, financial work, and report directly to the mayor. That was debated for nearly 10 years, and that was ultimately decided. I think that was a critical decision point in the city's history, because part of this process and what you're working through is identifying systemic challenges the city has. Obviously, the charter is not a document that's going to solve all policy issues, nor should it be. That's for the mayor and the council. They get elected to make policy decisions, and they should be allowed to do that as the voters see fit. And future mayors and councils should have the authority to exercise different priorities if the voters elect other officials with different priorities. But what we're talking about is looking for systemic issues that can be fixed with the charter, essentially the rules of the game. And there are many challenges in the city, some of which can be solved with the charter, but what you're not going to see in the city of Los Angeles, certainly as much as you will see in other governments, and I'll use Washington as the best / worst example. What you don't see in the city of Los Angeles is gridlock. You don't see stalemates. And part of the reason I think that that is the case over time, of course, you have disagreements, you have different positions that different council members take, opposed to the mayor, maybe the council as a whole, will be in opposition to whatever the mayor may want to do. But the fact that my office is the central financial office and the central administrative office, it forces collaboration, and that's critical for the efficiency portion of what we're trying to do here. There are roles, you know, I'm going to use the terms efficiency, accountability, and transparency. And those are distinct outcomes and objectives. But as it relates to creating a more efficient government, having a central financial body, a central financial office that reports equally to the mayor and the council is critical. Because you cannot separate, mind you cannot separate financial policy from financial management from policy. I mean, the budget, if you look at the budget versus budget really is the single most comprehensive policy document that the city puts out every year. It requires collaboration between the mayor and council on shared priorities, and if a policy priority isn't funded, then it really isn't a priority. It really all does come down to what's funded. So it's as we talk through this, and again, I said I wasn't going to get into recommendations, but I would caution against separating financial management from the policy making process. I think that's critical for the accountability portion. You elect a mayor to be the chief executive of the city. You elect a council to be the policy legislative body of the city, to provide oversight. And they have to have the tools in order to implement their priorities as approved by voters when they elected them. So we can talk more about that in the Q&A. We can move to the next slide. The mission statement of the CAO's office, again, is to provide sound independent advice and recommendations to the mayor and the council on fiscal condition, financial status, and future needs of the city, and to promote innovation, resilience, economy, and efficiency in the conduct of city government, so that available resources provide the greatest benefit possible to the residents of the city of Los Angeles. What I'd like to do, much of what I have in the deck that's in front of you is information for the record. I pulled out some of the charter sections, so make it easy for you and the members of the public to see the relevant sections. We can move. I'll have I included in the work chart at the CAO's office. That's on the next slide. But I think what we can do is we would skip to the powers and duties section, which is MBS, which is section 3. I'm sorry, I didn't. But yes, they are. There is page numbers. Great. So powers and duties of the office. They are many, but there is a reason for that. And again, when the purpose of the office is to create efficiency and accountability, when you look at the types of authority that you would grant, the charter would grant, there's consolidated authority, there's diffuse authority, and there's independent authorities. And there's a role for all types of authorities. Clearly, independent authority would be the greatest kind of structure if we were looking to create bigger transparency. you want to have an independent review, and I think that the controller's office plays a critical role in the transparency, the critical transparency that's required in a public entity that's spending billions of dollars a year of taxpayer dollars. And so that independence supports that objective of having that transparency that the controller's office provides. But as it relates to efficiency and accountability, that really needs to be, accountable, and needs to be under the purview of the mayor as it relates to financial management and the administrative management of the city, the mayor and council. So the areas of, key areas of the CAO's office, budget preparation, budget administration, budget control. I'm going to say a few words on each of these in a moment. Revenue estimates, cost analysis, labor relations, program evaluation and performance management, debt management, and then other duties as assigned. And I'll talk about that as well. I'll talk about that now. The other duties as assigned comes from the unique position of the CAO's office as being the office that generally reports, being the central administrative branch office of the city. And so oftentimes we will be assigned work to incubate or pilot that would be moved to an operating department if the policymakers wish to move forward with it. As an example, we have in our office currently we're managing the unarmed model crisis response program. That is a pilot program. We're entering into our third year, completing, depending on when you start and when you start the clock, but it's almost his third year. And clearly that type of work isn't central to a chief financial office, but it's part of our administrative function. We're incubating the program, we're testing it, we're providing analysis and reporting to the mayor and council, and with the hope of institutionalizing the program at the right time in an operating department. Going back to budget preparation, what does that actually mean? It's an ongoing process. It means absolutely everything from top to bottom as it relates to the financial status of the city, financial condition of departments, and the analysis required for the mayor and council to make those decisions. So we start with the direction that's provided by the mayor in the budget letter. The mayor gives directions to council. Much of this you may have heard yesterday when Mr. Wexler, my colleague at CAO, gave you the budget 101 presentation. The departments develop their budgets. They submit the budgets to the mayor and CAO, and then we do top to bottom analysis, both on programmatically as if whether what they are saying they need meshes with the program they're trying to move forward. How the program, we include an analysis about how the programs have performed over time. We make recommendations to the mayor. The mayor ultimately makes the decisions in the proposed budget, and then we kind of switch gears and provide that same analysis for the council as they're evaluating the mayor's proposed budget. Budget administration and control. What that is it's once we have an adopted budget, we begin fiscal year. It's a plan. It's only ever a plan. It's never going to be perfect because it's based on estimates of what we think we're going to spend and what the revenue we're going to bring in. So we are constantly monitoring the revenues as they come in. Because the revenues of the city relies on some, they come in at different times over the year. So we really, unlike cities that rely heavily on property tax, we have a diverse revenue base, which can be helpful when there's problems in certain sectors. And property tax clearly is our largest source of revenue, but our general fund relies heavily on business tax, sales tax, and TOT, transient hotel tax, essentially, and other economically sensitive taxes. Business tax We really don't have an idea about business tax, current year's performance of business tax until the second half of the fiscal years as we start collecting business tax revenue. So, our revenue projections are constantly evolving because, of course, the projections for next year are based on performance of the current year. In order to be in a situation or put ourselves in the best situation to make adjustments, we issue financial status reports, and we issue 4 financial status reports a year. When we are able to provide an estimate about how departments are performing on the expenditure side and how revenues are coming in. In those financial status reports, we make projections. If the trends continue, we're going to end the year with an X deficit or an X surplus. And then we make recommendations to the council to make adjustments so that we aren't sitting and waiting to the end of the year with an unbalanced budget. It's a critical function. And this is what we're talking about, was a budget control, which is extraordinarily helpful as we're talking about, for example, our bond ratings, which are very good. And the controller did mention that 1 of the 4 agencies did drop us by 1 notch. That was in the wake of the wildfires. And they made this particular rating agency did drop the city and dropped Department of Water and Power very, very early on. The others held and wanted to see how we would perform in the wake of wildfires, and how we dealt with the budget challenges that we have this year. And the recommendations that we made, although they were difficult, they were required, they were a balanced budget. The mayor proposed a balanced budget, albeit it required layoffs, and those were tough decisions, and we were not happy about making those decisions, but we made them because they were required. Council worked the budget through, and they also they made changes, of course, but it's still a balanced budget. And so that stabilized where we were with the rating agencies. Another example is during COVID. During COVID, there was a just precipitous drop in our revenue projections, and because we have the budget controls in place, we were able to make the CAO's office make serious recommendations to control for the dramatic loss of revenue that we had. And so these are critical functions. These are functions that I think are absolutely required to be at the disposal of the mayor and council, because they're responsible for managing the city. I'll run through the others as briefly as I can, and then we can get to questions. As I said, our office is ultimately responsible for making the revenue estimates. The revenue estimates that the mayor and council use to build their budget. We work with the controller's office on those estimates. We work with the office of finance on those estimates. But ultimately we make the final call on those estimates. We also conduct all the cost analyses for all the projects, all the programs, to ensure that what services the council authorizes actually cost what they say that they'll cost, or what the departments would say that they cost. So it's important to have that oversight function over departments to ensure that it is an accurate, or as accurate as possible, representation about the cost of the proposals that they're making. So it is important to have that layer that the CAO's office provides. We also manage and are responsible for all labor relations in the city. I'm the city's chief negotiator with labor unions. That is absolutely critical, just as it's critical to have the finance and the financial management function of the city tied with the policymaking function of the city. It is critical to have the labor relations function tied with the financial function. And the reason for that is that the city is ultimately we are paying for employees to carry out city services. 80% of everything city spends is salary and benefits for city employees who are carrying out services. So that has to be part of the same process, the same analysis, the same forecasting as the budget and financial management forecasting. As it relates to evaluation, section 292 of the charter gives the CEO authority and responsibility for evaluation and performance management. And that's carried out in a number of ways. I did establish a division in the CEO's office when I became CEO for equity, performance management, and innovation. The principal charge of that group was to incorporate equity metrics in our budget evaluation, which we began and have been implementing as part of the budget development process. This group, the innovation side of this division is also the group that's piloting around modeled crisis response. The office also, another part of my office, another division of my office is also responsible for all of our debt management. And we manage a $6 billion portfolio for debt that the city issues. A greatest and most recent example of which was we just made the council and mayor made a major decision on the convention center project that's going to be built by issuing debt. We're going to pay that off over 30 years. It's a decision that the mayor and council made with the full information that was provided by my office as to what it would cost in this year, next year, the year after, for the next 30 years. Let me see, I think probably not. I'm gonna come back and speak to you in greater detail and perhaps provide some recommendations, but I think I'll stop there and I don't know for your questions.
And we'll welcome you to come back with any investigation. We'll turn your question right now. Commissioner Matt, let's start.
Thank you for your presentation. As you discussed, earlier in this power and duties slide shown over there, it's clear that the CEO will resist a lot of roads in the city. I was wondering if you could share some of related to the foundation of how one-on-one with the city does. Can you share some of the obstacles and challenges that you experience while just carrying out your duties? And maybe I'll hold off on getting your answer because you're going to have the presentations, but if you have initial thoughts of where you see kind of opportunities for us to close that gap in the strategy.
Sure, so I would say again, as I mentioned, the principles of efficiency and accountability. The way I see that, as we're thinking about structures, you're going to have the most efficiency when you have greater centralization and direct accountability. Oftentimes, for example, oftentimes the goal of efficiency will conflict with the goal of transparency. As an example, when let's use the COVID or the wildfires, when the mayor assumed emergency powers. That is, emergency powers are provided to the mayor in emergency situations because we don't, it's an emergency and we don't have time to go through a lengthy procurement process or a committee process in order to respond to an immediate emergency. And so the mayor has emergency authority there. That's very efficient. And there's direct accountability at the cost of perhaps some transparency. So I think as we're thinking, and this is just in theoretical now, we'll get down later on specific. But as it relates to financial management functions, I think some greater consolidation could be worth considering. The challenges in my office, I'll say it's a unique position and unique, role. You know, because I jointly report, to mayor and the council. That's, you know, that creates the kind of, challenges sometimes that you would expect, but I don't think that's a structural problem. I actually think that's a good thing, because it requires, collaboration, and it, as I said, it prevents having just entrenched positions, and it prevents, gridlock. So, you know, it's oftentimes where, there may be a committee chair that wants to do one thing, and the mayor wants to do another thing. And that just requires working with both sides and coming to recommendations that are acceptable to the mayor and are acceptable to the majority of the council. I'm not identifying that as a challenge. I think that's part of the job. I think that's a good thing. That's really part of the democratic process.
And then just a follow up on before I hand it to my fellow commissioners, I think, so you mentioned, briefly kind of, the need for more consolidation amongst, financial operations. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? And then just for my personal clarification and understanding of how, the CAO office interacts with other, city departments, how often do you work closely with, the controller and also the department?
We will all answer the second one first. I think the first, I may want to defer until I come back with some recommendations. We work very closely and very well with the controller's office, and with the office of finance. In fact, it was interesting in this last cycle, when the controller mentioned, an instance where our revenue, estimates, were diverged a bit. This current fiscal year, we both did independent work and came to our independent conclusions. And we were off in an $8 billion budget. We were off by about $4 million of each of our estimates. We work very well together. The controller, and he plays a critical accounting role in the city, and much of our responsibilities include, again, part of financial management is that we develop controller instructions. So the controller writes checks, and we provide the specific instructions to the controller's office on exactly what is authorized to expand. So we work very, very closely, and same with the office of finance.
Yeah. So you touched on the recent crises, like the COVID pandemic, as well as the recent fires. So with proposals like creating a SCFO or restructuring financial authority improve or complicate emergency response for future crises?
Well, it would depend on what it looks like. I certainly, I think it's establishing the CFO, naming the CFO, I think would be probably as important externally as it is internally. It's, you know, that is a title that is recognizable. And when you're engaging with rating agencies or investors who are selling their bonds, there's no question, you know, because their job is to know how the city works. They know how the city's finances are managed, and so there's no question we're the liaison with the investors and rating agencies. But it would be, I think in terms of streamlining and just making things clearer, I think that would be helpful. As it relates to emergency response, typically what happens is when, again, as part of that emergency need, what happens is both in COVID and with wildfires, the mayor is given in some cases unilateral authorities. But it's with my office in terms of that we're given the authority to expend dollars at the direction of the mayor. And so that is kind of a natural, that's our current process. I think that works pretty well because we're also the office then that interfaces with FEMA. And Cal, yes, to ensure that we get properly reimbursed for all the expenditures, the emergency expenditures that we made, the additional overtime, et cetera, for fire department, police department in response to wildfires. And then all of the construction and recovery work that needs to be done, that also is in our office. So I think the current structure is fairly effective.
That's helpful. I have a follow-up question to that actually. And you had mentioned the need to keep policymaking and finance coupled together. Do you think creating a CFO and having it in the controller's office might actually decouple it, or would it add? Could it even confuse the important duties of the CAO?
I do, and the reason for that is, the controller is an independent elected official. And there is, and that brings to that office, critical independence. I think particularly in the area of auditing. There are many other jurisdictions that have public advocates, that kind of model where you elect an official independent of the city structure because you want that person to be able to be critical of the city structure. I think that makes all sense in the world for the purpose of achieving that transparency that's required in a government that's spending $8 billion in a fund a year. But as it relates to the accountability and efficiency parts, you cannot decouple the financial management from the policymakers, and in particular, you cannot decouple financial management from being accountable to the chief executive of the city and essentially the board of directors of the city council. You can't hold, ultimately they're responsible. The mayor is being held accountable, but you can't hold the mayor accountable unless the mayor and the council have the authority to carry out what they are being expected to carry out. You make commitments to the voters expect that they're going to be able to do things that they say they're going to do, and that needs to be more than just saying that for something, you need to be able to actually do something. As Mr. Mejia said a couple of times, in his proposal, it would still remain advisory. That in no way, shape, or form would it make sense to have an advisory CFO? There's no organization anywhere where the CFO has an advisory authority. That doesn't make any sense. So I think if you would, and I'm not advocating for this, but I think you would need to really open up. And if the controller's office was, if you were looking to put it there, and I think we should look at the problem we're trying to solve before we look at the moves, but whatever portion of the controller's office, it would make more sense if it was a consolidated body that is not elected, not independently elected. I think that's the point I think so important. It is critical for the CFO to report to, be accountable to the mayor and city council.
Yeah, because maybe the answer to follow up, it would become speculative, but do you think that maybe an IG title line better serve the fraud, waste, and abuse functionality instead of CFO title in that sense?
I think that would make a lot of sense. I do.
Alright, thank you. I have one more question. And because we're talking about, not just CFO today, but also other executive offices, you had said that general managers, work with your office and that there's some kind of response similar to a city manager or CEO of cities. Do you think formalizing that relationship, making someone in the CAO's office a city manager or a CAO or a CEO would be beneficial? And you can say that in your recommendations.
Yeah, I think I'll defer that. I think I'll defer that to the recommendations, and at that time I think I can go more deeply into what what powers, what powers the CAO has as it relates to the departments and the national authority that we have with departments. I think in the city, like Los Angeles, so for example, the county has a CEO. But the board is both the legislative and the executive body. In this city, the mayor is the executive. So it's, I think there's a balance. The departments, the mayor has management authority over the departments. The council has oversight authority and planning authority for those departments. If, again, I'll defer to my presentation recommendations. But I think there are ways, if we're looking for more efficiency and accountability, that things may change, whether it's additional authorities to the CAO's office or additional authorities to the mayor's office.
Yes, thank you. Any other follow-ups?
Quick comment, not a question, but I think, part of the government structure, this committee, I think we talk a lot about efficiency kind of government structure, but I think also part of this committee is, talking about how to better represent, the residents of Los Angeles, and so I think I brought this up last meeting, to, Mr. Ressler, who talked to us about budget process, but I think it's, worth mentioning here as well. Something that's come up in our previous meeting is around public engagement and specifically when the budget comes out, not enough time for the public to review when public hearing happens. And so I just wanted to voice that to you, so you can hear back when you have recommendations, kind of what your thought process on that. I think something we talked about yesterday was the timeline and what happens and what is feasible in pushing that timeline so that it allows for more kind of engagement, but also allows for council members, members of communities to look at the budget. And so just kind of a comment that I wanted to share with you, and I think it's something the commission has also.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming today, Mr. CAO. We are excited to welcome you back in the future and hear our recommendations. Thank you for your time. Do I have a motion to receive and file today's recommendation?
So moved.
Great. Any objections? Without objection, we are going to receive and file that. Now, before we adjourn today, I would like to give the public and my fellow commissioners a little bit of an overview about the rest of our time looks like. On 10/16, we'll be talking about city council expansions. We're gonna have a lot of presentation about what that might look like and the pros and cons of the numbers and multi-member and single member districts. Then on 10:30, we're gonna talk about the role of the city attorney. We'll have about 2 weeks of recess after that, assuming we follow the current calendar, to be able to parse through any staff reports. I directed staff to give us a report for each of the meetings, each of the topics that we talked about in our various meetings, so we'll receive several pretty technical documents that give us the pros and cons of specific recommendations, and I'll be working directly with staff to create those before it goes to the public and for commissioners. And this is also going to serve as my formal call to the public, to academics, to interest groups, policymakers. Should you have anything you would like to submit that is germane to this committee in the form of white papers or research papers, please feel free to do that. Comments would be very beneficial to our staff, and ourselves, as we not only hear what we're interested in, but we see very substantive explanations about the pros and cons of any different issue we might work through. And yeah, that's all. Thank you so much for coming. I definitely do think that prior to the deliberation process, there will be time on our agenda for commissioners to talk about how we're feeling to guide staff to continue to create these memos. Yeah, do I have a call or a motion to adjourn? State time. That's fine.
Yeah, last evening, it was brought up about public comment, and I do see some people here on Zoom with us, so thank you for joining us. Is there a way we can engage people virtually for virtual public comment?
Yeah,
Is that meetings or no?
Yeah, about that, and Nathan said that it differs on the room and the specific technical abilities of the room. So as you see from today, there had issues with streaming on the TV, so I've encouraged them to try to get in future meetings with adjustments to any specifics.
We'll circle back. Yeah, we're still working on those, just some technology in this group. The Board of Public Works is like the ideal room to do things, that does not end, the conversations.
Yeah, that's the privilege we get something like that, that will be a lot of public concern.
Yeah, especially with those topics that are coming up that are sensitive to the public, and then a follow-up to that. In terms of receiving presentations, the controllers came in, literally have those on my way to this meeting, so is there any way we can get our presentations a bit? I don't know if that.
I have a similar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just because I wanna treat it as very.
I can promise the commissioners, and Max knows this very well, we are asking for these presentations days in advance. And giving deadlines of days in advance. We appreciate our presenters, coming and presenting their documents, but we don't have so much control over when they actually get to us. So we are asking and someone providing today was, not a win on those fronts. A win.
Thank you. Any, okay, and I have a meeting to adjourn. So, seeing no objection, we will adjourn for the day, see everybody on 10/16. Thank you.